welcome to CivicLex's Digital Town Hall on federal support systems for businesses. We're going to be talking today with two guests on here. Dan Mason, who's the president of Traditional Bank, and Fausto Sarmiento, who is a consultant and is with Performance Driven LLC. We're really excited to have both of them here. And in true 2020 fashion, between this morning and now, a lot of information's changed about this topic. So it's going to be kind of a as wild a ride as a digital town hall can be. I do want to set a couple ground rules just to make sure that this goes smoothly. The first thing is that you're being recorded, so I just want to make sure that everyone knows that. If you don't speak, you won't be recorded. The camera won't shift to you. So if you have any problems with that, you can either not talk, or if you want to speak at some point, you can turn off the camera on your computer. You can do that with the button to the right of the end button or the hang up call button. We also are trying to keep this a pretty respectful space. I do have the ability to mute anyone, so if someone starts getting riled up, I can do that. If they stay riled up and are refusing to leave, I do have the option to boot someone from the call, but we've never had that happen. So let's just keep our fingers crossed that everyone is feeling nice and happy today. A couple other rules. Generally, this is how the format's going to go. I'm going to provide some opening questions to our two guests. Well, I'm going to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves, and then we'll have a few opening questions. And then at about a half hour into the call, we'll start taking questions from all of you. I'm sure a lot of you all have questions about these two topics. There's been a lot of information going around about them. So if you have any questions, just drop those questions in the chat. And when it becomes appropriate, I will make sure that we get that you have a chance to ask those face-to-face if you want to. It's not all going to have to be passed through me, just to make sure you all know that. So I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Why don't we start with Dan? You are kind of split between video camera and phone call in. So Dan, if you want to say hello and tell us a little bit about yourself, that would be great. Dan with Traditional Bank.
Yeah, sure. I guess the video won't switch to me because my mic's muted, so it won't get feedback. But yeah, Richard, thanks for inviting me today. Fausto, good to see you. Hope what I have to say will be helpful for folks. So I'm from Lexington, graduated from Lafayette College at Colorado State, and been in banking for about 30 years, and been at Traditional Bank for almost 10 years. So I was the chief lending officer, and then in January took over the presidency of the bank. Kind of my brief history.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan. And I do want to provide a little bit of full disclosure here to everyone. Traditional Bank is our bank at CivicLex, so we bank with them. So I do want to provide that little bit of disclosure. I don't know if I need to, but I'm going to. Fausto, would you like to introduce yourself and say hello?
Sure. First of all, Richard, thank you very much for inviting me on the program today. It's an honor to be part of the presentation with Dan. And hello to everybody out there. My name is Fausto Sarmiento. Thank you, Liz. I'm the founding consultant of Performance Driven LLC. It combines the passion I have for performance, both on my motorsports side as well as on my business side. I tell people that really the best way to be successful is to manage risk successfully. And when you do that in a performance-driven fashion, success hopefully will follow. But no, I have a business background myself. I was in business banking for 6 years in my hometown of Athens, Georgia. I worked with a community bank there. I helped start a branch that catered to the minority community, the Hispanic community. I moved to Lexington about 10 years ago, and for a number of those years, I also worked at the University of Kentucky as a business consultant. So I'm looking forward to getting into this issue that's near and dear to me, certainly about assistance to small business. Richard, again, thank you for the ability to participate today.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, to both of you all. I know everyone's really busy right now, and you all taking an hour out of your days means a lot both to us, and we hope it'll be really helpful for folks that are on the call. So for those of you all that haven't seen the news today, we have just found out today that both the PPP program and the EIDL program, which are sort of the two programs that we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about today, are both out of resources. So that's obviously going to change the entire conversation today, but I'm kind of interested in how it's going to change it, and sort of what we can, how we can use this as a jumping off point for talking about additional support systems down the line. But first, I guess, how are Fausto and Dan, I'm going to throw this open to either of you all. How are y'all doing? I'm sure it's been a really, really busy time. Are you all doing all right?
Sure. Dan, I'll go first if you don't mind, since I probably have the least to say in terms of how are things going. Certainly it's a tough time. I'm a small business owner myself, and part of what I do is event functions and event management. And so that's probably the segment of my business that's been directed the most, as so many events have been postponed, canceled, suspended. So that certainly has had the biggest impact. But in terms of my coaching, in terms of my consulting, that's still going. I have reduced my rates in order to help business owners get some assistance at a more accessible rate. And I'm happy to say that that's been going pretty strongly as well. So I'm happy about that. But other than that, it's just trying to go through the very same things that my clients are going through, learning about the PPP, the EIDL, how that impacts my business.
Dan, what about you? I'm sure it's been crazy over there at Traditional.
Yeah, it's been a really busy 3 weeks in a lot of uncertainty. As this thing rolled out on March 27th, there was guidance that kept coming out that would give us more information about how to process the loans, and that really didn't stop until earlier this week. To know how we're going to fund the loans, what kinds of notes we could use, and we still don't know how to communicate with the SBA to let them know that we've funded loans, and we have this 10-day window from the date of approval through the SBA to fund them. So, but we have no way of notifying. It's been really busy and really challenging, but at the same time, it's been kind of gratifying because we think we've done a decent job of putting together a process and getting our business customers money that they needed. So we're good. That's
great. I want to go ahead and try and provide a little bit of background into what these two programs are and the sort of conversation around them. Fausto, do you want to explain a little bit of a difference between the PPP and EIDL?
Sure. Well, and just real quick to note, Dan, certainly community banks, smaller regional banks have been taking the lead role in funders. So Dan, thanks to you and your team for all the hard work you guys are doing to support small businesses. And Richard, to answer your question, there's significant differences between the EIDL and the PPP, the Payment Protection Program. Ideally, businesses will want to see whether or not it makes sense to apply for both. Generally speaking, the EIDL, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, is the most flexible and is the program that you can utilize in the broadest sense. A part of that is through an advance grant. When the program was first introduced, we were told that basically everybody would be receiving a $10,000 advanced grant that would not have to be repaid, before the SBA would then later contact you to figure out exactly what else you would get as part of the full EIDL package. However, as situations changed and developed, we've now learned that the loan, the advanced part of the loan, is $1,000 per employee, up to a maximum of $10,000. So if your business only has 2 employees, you're only going to get $2,000 of that $10,000 that was initially discussed as being advanced to small businesses. I've also heard a couple different things, and I've seen actually a couple different examples. There's been talk now that the EIDL is limited to no more than a maximum of 25,000, 10,000 from the advance, and then 15 for operating expenses. However, I've also been told that some businesses have received up to 70,000 through the EIDL as a whole. So certainly it's still a fluid situation. The PPP, the Payroll Protection Program, that one is, as people have heard, is now exclusively for payroll purposes, with the addition of some other expenses, mortgage interest, rent, utilities, etc. Certainly the PPP, if a business has a number of employees and intends on actually working through the pandemic, is an overall very good program. But we'll talk about some of the details between the two and how they could impact your business as we get deeper into the conversation. Thank you, Richard.
Great, yeah. Dan, I mean, traditional bank is obviously an SBA lender, and I know that you all have processed a lot of PPP applications. Can you give us sort of a ballpark of what that demand has been? Do you have any sort of, it seems like it's been pretty high.
Yeah, the response has been almost overwhelming. The term forgiveness, I think, got a lot of people's attention. The thought that they could borrow money and keep their employees employed and then ultimately be forgiven and come out on the other side in really good shape. So I think that generated a whole lot of interest early on before we had all the rules and all the procedures in place. But you know, to give it what the scale is for us, Richard, we had 799 applications that we accepted and were ultimately approved by the SBA. That doesn't give you any frame of reference, but we did that in 3 weeks. Most of that is funded at this point. What we typically do in a month is about 200 loans. So for us to scale that in a very short period of time, it was pretty incredible what our people did. So the demand was robust.
Yeah, I remember getting an email from you all on a Sunday, and I was like, oh wow, yeah, they must be really, that's like Sundays are that's crazy. I mean, what has it been like for the folks that are working at traditional bank? I mean, have you all seen like additional demands or constraints being put on employees or anything? Like, how is everyone that works there hanging in there through this time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll see if I can frame that up for you. So our people are dealing with all the same things that everybody else is, from childcare issues with childcare centers being closed, kids at home, perhaps dealing with elderly family members, the quarantining, fear issues, and so there's all of those. In fact, we're on a very thin staff at our banking centers, trying to keep enough folks there to keep the drive-throughs going. So that's been an interesting dynamic, and then to build basically what is a new loan process in a very short period of time, and people working on weekends and late into the night. It's definitely stressed our system and our people, but our people have really risen to the occasion and really wanted to be a part of the cause, I guess, to get money out to our business customers out there. So it's been inspiring, really, what our people have done.
That's great. And I do want to remind people, as we're having this sort of conversation, if thoughts pop into your mind, or if you have questions, or if you have any input that you want to provide, just put it in the chat, which is in the top right of the screen, the little text message looking icon. And we can make sure to work that into the conversation, or get to it later in the conversation when there's time for more sort of a question and answer style time. So Fausto, you're kind of on the exact opposite end, in that you're a consultant, right? And that you're self-employed, right? Like you're sort of in charge of what you're up to from top to bottom. What has it been like as a consultant? And I have a couple other questions about how self-employed people can factor into these programs in a minute. But what's it been like for you as a small business owner? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Certainly, I probably have it, I think, easier than several of my small business colleagues and peers. I am a single member entity, so I don't have to worry about carrying employees. I don't have to worry about carrying a lot of overhead. So certainly my experience is somewhat easier to deal with than Martine, for example, who's on the call with us, and the cafe that she has with her employees. But as far as my day-to-day, certainly it's keeping track of some of the changes that are ongoing with regards to the various government programs. Don't forget, in addition to the PPP and the EIDL, there are a couple other programs that may benefit small business customers. So happy to get into some of those as well. But it's also just about making sure that we continue to network, continue to put our business out there. One of the things that I tell my customers to consider too, that if they intend to stay open, and certainly if they intend to follow the guidelines of the PPP and get back on board as quickly as possible, to make sure that they look at what expenses they can, as I call it nowadays, invest in, such as marketing, advertising. It's important to realize that even though the face of the business may have been completely eliminated or even diminished by 50, 75%, it's important to make sure that you let the community know that you are there, that you're still working to provide a benefit, to provide a service, to provide goods, so that you can still stay top of mind, so that you can still advertise to the community as a whole. Certainly, it's also to remember that it's important to plan for what the startup, the reopening will look like for you as a business owner specifically. The inspiration really behind why I decided to lower my rates for community supporters now was because so many of my clients are in the food service industry, and they were receiving a lot of support from the community through the purchase of gift cards. But in talking with them, I realized that all of that money was going to fund current expenses. But in the fall, when everything reopened, there would be new expenses, new meals that would have to be supplied, new vendors that would have to be paid. But if everybody is paying through money that they purchased the gift card with, there's no new revenue coming in, right? So being able to really be aware of what you have and what you'll need and how you'll spend those resources as a business is certainly an important aspect now that all business owners have to be aware of.
Yeah, I think that's a really important. It was interesting as that sort of campaign, right, to get people to purchase gift cards. It was ramping up. I mean, obviously it's a really amazing way to support local businesses, but there's the time for the other shoe of those gift cards to drop. And I think that's a really great point to start planning a little bit for further down the line. And we'll get to a little bit more about that in a minute. But you mentioned some other government support programs. Another part of the CARES Act was the sort of federal boost to unemployment insurance. And for a lot of people, I think that additional boost to unemployment insurance is in some ways almost at odds with the PPP, with PPP itself, right? One is designed to preserve the workforce, and one is designed to make it easier for folks that are no longer able to work. So, this is a question for either of you all. Do you all see those two programs in tension, or do you think that they're complementary? What have you all been seeing as it relates to that?
We've had some comment on that topic because small business owners that want to bring back in their help with the enhanced unemployment. Oftentimes, what they're paying would be less than what they're receiving in unemployment. So, the reality of trying to bring back those people is not going to happen and the forgiveness portion of the PPP has to do with maintaining headcount as well as maintaining your payroll dollars. So they do compete, and just anecdotally have had some business owners comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there is a direct correlation, right, between the workforce and the businesses. However, keep in mind that when the government created these two programs, they were created separately, one for business owners and one for the workforce. Certainly the unemployment benefits and the unemployment insurance and the changes regarding that program is helping a lot of people. It's helping the workforce. The unemployment isn't really designed, well, it's not designed to help business owners specifically. That's why the PPP and the EIDL programs came about. It does unfortunately place business owners and employers and employees against each other. But again, keep in mind that the extra $600 that was added to the unemployment insurance is there in order to motivate people to stay home, in order to increase social distance, in order to flatten the curve. The PPP is geared for getting businesses back to their pre-disaster parity level in terms of their payroll costs. And so as businesses ramp up, they will start to rehire. They are not under the obligation of hiring the same people that used to work for them. Ideally, that would be the case. But again, in the government side, they're trying to provide benefits to employers on one side and to employees, the workforce, on the other side. And they want to make sure that those that need to stay home have the benefit there to stay home as long as possible. But the PPP program is there to make sure that business owners who can reopen so that they can provide work at a reasonably safe location can reopen as quickly as possible. And certainly if an employee decides that they'd rather not go back to work, if work is available in a reasonably safe place, then, you know, unfortunately, technically that person would stand to lose their unemployment benefits. So there is that motivation to get employers and employees back together again. Should a laid off individual not want to go to work, you know, again, there's the enforcement issue of how is unemployment going to know exactly who was offered what, et cetera. But those are conversations that need to take place between business owners and their employees, excuse me.
Yeah, and you know, I think it's really important also in that context to understand, right, that unemployment insurance runs out after 4 months, right? Like that, you know, it is not an indefinite timeline. And also on the PPP side, that, you know, there is a firm date when you have to have rehired your workforce in whatever format, you know, even if that takes on a little bit of a different.
Correct. And Richard, if I may say, just, you know, real quick, business owners are certainly motivated to take the workforce level back up to where it was pre-disaster as quickly as possible. Should business owners not do that, or should business owners decide to hire fewer people than before, then the amount of the loan that they receive through the PPP program would be that forgiveness would be reduced as well, right? And so the decision there is it in the business owner's best interest to take PPP versus not taking it. One other program that the government designed in order to help business owners through this period really is through the sick leave, basically. And so business owners can, as a tax credit, if they decide to stay open, they can claim up to 50% of an employee's wages, up to $10,000 per employee, to help them offset some of their employment costs. So, for example, if a business decides to furlough some employees, but not all, to keep high-level managers, keep people on staff, they can, should they then decide not to take the PPP, they can claim that tax credit for relief that's supposed to be eligible to be claimed sooner rather than later through that tax credit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, in a lot of these conversations between PPP and EIDL, there's a lot of focus on those two programs and not as much focus on the rest of the programs that were part of the CARES Act. So I think I'm really glad that you brought that up, Fausto. So obviously there's significant demand. Both of these programs are currently out of money, and there are, I'm sure, small business owners on this call that are looking for support still, right? I mean, at least anecdotally, there are a lot of people that either submitted their PPP application or submitted an EIDL application that feel that maybe either are still in some sort of limbo or haven't, or maybe they haven't applied yet, but still need assistance. So, hopefully it looks like that there is conversation in Congress about additional stimulus measures. And so I guess I want to talk with you all a little bit on one hand, what are the support systems, if nothing else were to come out of Congress, what are the support mechanisms that you would recommend business owners looking into, at this time? And then on the other hand, what measures would you want to see in additional stimulus? If additional stimulus legislation was coming from the federal government, what would you want to see in that legislation to make this process easier and more effective for you all and for small business owners? Those are two long questions. So whichever one you all want to tackle first, I'll turn it over to you.
Our arsenal of what we've been doing a lot of is interest-only periods for those that have amortizing debt. Those people that depend on tenants to pay them. There are times when we defer payments for a period of time so they don't have to make payments, and we deal with that on the backside. We've done that on both the consumer and commercial side. In some instances, we can lend additional money. We're still constrained by our safety and soundness mandates from our regulators, but we've done some of that as well to keep people kind of going until the economy opens back up again. So those tools are out there for people. Most banks are doing the same thing. So if somebody out there is in need of some relief, talk to your bank and see what they can do for you for maybe interest-only periods or payment deferrals, or in some cases, depending on the circumstances, taking on additional debt if it makes sense.
Do you feel like that the best way to understand those options is to be in touch personally with the bank that you are with, whatever entity that your accounts are with, and talk to them about what the options are that are best for you? Do you feel like that's the best approach for that?
That's what I think. That's where you should have a relationship and somebody who understands you. It makes the process a lot quicker than trying to educate your banker on what you've done, a new banker on how you got to where you are and what you're up to. So it just speeds up the process. And a lot of this business is still relationship based. So if you've got a relationship with a banker, that's the best place to start.
Awesome. Fausto, is there anything that comes to top of mind that in terms of like best practices that businesses can be focusing on, or support systems that businesses can look towards, now that PPP and EIDL are both exhausted?
Yeah, well, certainly I would say that the most critical part right now is to make sure you're tracking everything. If the business is still open, make sure you're tracking your income, make sure you're tracking payroll. If your business has closed or if sales have slowed down, if you've cut your hours down, track all of that information as well. In order to receive full forgiveness, don't forget there's quite a lot of documentation that you as a business owner will need to provide in order to receive as much of the forgiveness as you're due. So certainly tracking and documentation are important factors. As Dan alluded, communication is critical. And again, I'll stress that it's the smaller banks, the community banks, the regional banks that have been taking the lead on funding. And so being able to have those relationships, to have a trusted financial partner in a bank that knows your business, knows what you're up to, that knows what you need is important. And I would say to add on to that, as business owners right now, make sure that you're keeping as much cash in the business as possible. And again, certainly that's much easier said than done. But for example, as you're receiving some of the funds from the PPP, from the EIDL, really sit down and sit through what expenses need to be spent, right? As additional funding may, the keyword there being may, as additional funding may become available. Don't forget that when you talk to your lenders, as hard as they're working and as wonderful as they are, the worst time to ask for a loan is when you need a loan, right? And when people need a loan, they don't have cash. So try to keep as much cash in your account as possible. That's going to put you in a much better negotiating position with your banking partners. So again, track, document, communicate, and understand what are the important expenses that need to be paid and which are the ones that can be sacrificed.
That's incredibly helpful advice. And I, along those lines, you were talking about, should additional support become available down the line? And this is a question that, I'm not sure if either of you feel like you want to answer, but I do want to put this out there. What do you feel like if additional assistance is going to be coming down the line? What would you in an ideal world like to see be a part of that? Are there things that were left out, or are there things that you would want to be done differently? Do you all have either of you have a response to that?
Well, for us, and Fausto, you introduced this idea, the PPP program, it measures, your payroll for a very short period of time, 8 weeks. There are going to be expenses out there for these non-essential businesses that have been shut down. There's startup expenses. Some of the employees that you had before are not going to come back, and so there's going to be training that needs to be spent and other expenses to restart the business back up, and also working capital for the demand. In a lot of cases, won't come overnight. It'll come in an upward slope. So there needs to be some provision to account for that. The EIDL, had some components of that, but anecdotally, a lot of our customers did not have success getting through with that program, and the PPP, has a very limited use of funds that the borrower certifies. So I would like to have some sort of program. EIDL would work, but something that provides the working capital and cash needed for reopening expenses and stabilization expenses coming out of the thing.
Absolutely. And, this is also, Fausto, I'm going to throw it over to you here in a second, but, for those of you all that are also business owners, or maybe even not business owners, right? For everyone, literally everyone else on the call, what are some things that you're looking for? What are some things that you feel like would be helpful for you as a business owner, as an employee, if additional stimulus legislation were to come? Fausto, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'll just add two things. For me, what I would like to see is a more organized rollout of whatever assistance happens next, right? I mean, it's been a disaster. It's I hate to say it, but it's kind of been silly stupid how much the programs have changed, how much the expectations have changed from what was originally introduced to what they are now. So a more organized rollout of whatever assistance comes next, I think, would be key to help business owners, again, understand and anticipate how much they can anticipate receiving, what will those terms be, et cetera, right? Being told that you'll get $10,000 to then only being told $1,000 per employee for small businesses like most of us, that's a huge difference. And then the second thing that I would like to see really is not related to the business world specifically at all. I think that in order for businesses to reopen, again, in order to minimize risk as much as possible, specifically with that threat, with the risk of having to shut down all over again because of a resurgence of the virus, which many people believe, unfortunately, will happen. But I'd like to see the healthcare system and the government step up their ability to test people. without additional testing, without being able to better understand how much and where of the virus is still out in the community, businesses reopen without knowing whether or not it's safe to do so. And the risk of reopening too soon, reopening with too little capital, for me, that's a huge risk as a small business owner that, again, after all dealing with this initial round of issues, having to go through the same thing again because of a resurgence of the virus due to no testing, I think is the worst possible outcome.
Absolutely. I think, oh, sorry, Dan, go ahead. Were you about to jump in?
Well, that is our worst nightmare. I don't think a lot of our businesses could take, even if there were more debt to take, if we double debt, they couldn't afford the debt load. And frankly, I'm not sure our country can afford to do another relief package on the magnitude of what they're doing now. That would be the worst of all cases, Fausto. I totally agree with you.
Yeah, the question of reopening, I think, is one that's on a lot of our minds. I saw that there was an agreement that was announced today, not only just between Kentucky, Indiana, and Ohio, but also involving some other states in the Midwest, including Michigan and I believe Wisconsin and Indy and maybe Illinois. I'll have to dig that up, but I saw that there was similar to what's been the deals that have been struck on the East Coast and the West Coast about sort of regional decisions about when to reopen. I think that is obviously on the top of everyone's mind. And so in addition to testing, to sufficient testing and working capital, is there anything else that you feel like needs to absolutely be in place before we can reopen our economy?
Those are certainly the two big things. Again, testing, right? Being able to understand what's the state of the environment so that people can come back to work safely and so that customers can safely return to our businesses. For me, those are the three critical factors.
Absolutely. And Dan, do you have anything to add to that?
No, those are the things I think about, are the big ones.
Yeah. So I want to provide some opportunity for folks on the call to ask questions or weigh in. So please start dropping things in the chat, or I might call on some of you all. Just kidding. I'm not going to call on you to ask a question. But if you do have a question or even a comment or just want to participate in the conversation, just drop something into the chat thread or unmute yourself here in a minute. And we can have a little bit more of a conversation. But with all of these town halls, we have tried really hard to kind of end each of these question sessions with the same question. And we think it's really important to discuss this across sectors and to discuss this across different industries. And that's a question that we feel like is often lost. We're so focused on what is happening in the moment and providing immediate relief that we don't want people to lose sight of the lessons that we can learn from this whole process. And so, I think I would be curious to hear from both of you all, what we can do, what lessons have you personally learned during this time that you feel like we need to make sure that we remember and hold on to whenever we come through this on the other side? And what can we do to make I don't know if you want to say make a society that works better or build a system that's more resilient for everyone. But what can we do? What lessons have we learned that we can carry through with us to the other side of this? Is there anything that's stuck in your all's mind about that?
I think I might need to pour myself a little bourbon to answer that one. That's a topic in and of itself. But yeah, certainly I think understanding that the workforce and unemployment benefits, insurance benefits that small businesses provide to their employees. I think out of all the different issues, setting aside the financing, setting aside the change in guidelines, certainly the most important thing that I would like to see long term is to reanalyze exactly how insurance is provided to employees, how people can purchase insurance. Right now, so much of insurance is employer provided, and when the employer shut down, I mean, what happens then, right? So for me, that's going to be the biggest takeaway in terms of a long-term discussion. What do we do about the workforce, and what's the interplay between employers and employees?
Absolutely. Dan, do you have any thoughts that you're carrying with you through all this time? Any lessons?
Well, mine are pretty simplistic in terms of advising folks. You know, I get reminded of what my grandmother, and this is going to sound hokey, and I get it, but you know, having a little money set aside for a rainy day is still worthwhile advice for our folks, and that leads into a whole nother, you know, conversation about, you know, wage, income inequality and all that kind of stuff. But to the extent we can, some of those simple things when you're running your business, you know, be aware of what your fixed payments are and, you know, how much staying power you have for the unexpected, because gosh, this proves that it's really hard to, plan for everything. I mean, things can happen that are just beyond our imaginations, and that have, you know, something set aside, something to fall back on, I think was good advice in the Great Depression and in the Great Recession and for situations like these. That crosses my mind.
Absolutely. So we have a couple comments that have come in on the chat. And I just want to provide an opportunity for anyone that has weighed in, if you want to unmute yourself and ask the question. But they both really revolve around the EIDL, EIDL pool. And yes, actually, Dan sent me an email about like 5 minutes before this started with an announcement that just came across SBA's website that EIDL has also been depleted. But it does say, I'm looking at their website right now, it does say applicants who have already submitted their applications will continue to be processed on a first come, first served basis. So they're no longer accepting new applications, but if you have applied, you are in the hopper, so to speak. I can't provide any more guidance than that, but that is a little bit of news about the EIDL applications. Does anyone have anything that they want to weigh in with, or any questions for Dan or for Fausto? You can just unmute yourself and jump in.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. This is Tim Guthrie. Hi, Fausto.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, Tim.
Richard, how are you?
Good.
Hey,
how are you doing?
I'm good. Dan, I've got a question for you about the forgiveness calculation and the components of that. There's a lot of, it's amazing. You can ask accountants and CPAs the same question, and it's not very often you get a I don't know answer from all of them. So from a bank's perspective, how are you all interpreting the forgiveness, the calculation of the forgiveness amount, and based on the head count, the amount that has to be spent on payroll and the timing of that?
Well, you know, in terms of the timing, you know, the clock starts ticking at the time of funding, and then it's 8 weeks from there. So that's the first piece. It's kind of three components, Tim, as we understand it, and as I read the reg. There's still a lot of holes in it, and they're still going to be providing us guidance. If I hear that word one more time, I'm going to pull my hair out, but waiting for guidance. So, you know, the first calculation has to do with how the money's spent, and you know there's permitted uses of the fund, and so that kind of sets your bar. 75% of that money over the 8-week period has to be spent on payroll to get full forgiveness, and then 25% on utilities, mortgage payments, rent, and so forth. So that sets your maximum. And then from there, there's some caps that are based on average monthly number of employees during the 8-week period, and then reference to a prior period depending on what's best for the borrower. And then there's this calculation of payroll dollars can't be less than 25% less than what the prior the reference period was. So that's the general calculations that are going to go into it. The first one is going to set the bar, and the other ones are going to be caps, as I understand it, and as I read the regulation. And from there, there's a whole lot of questions to be asked that we'll wait for clarification on.
Yeah. So is it your understanding, does the money have to be spent during the 8-week period? Because what I'm seeing from—
No, it does not. It has to be, if you want to get it forgiven,
yeah,
it does.
Yeah.
But if you want to hang on to that 1% loan for 2 years, then you don't. It doesn't have to be.
But if you don't spend it all for the allocated payroll amount, you're not completely excluded from forgiveness. You're just dinged on some proportionate level then.
That's our understanding.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks.
Sure.
Other questions from the. I mean, I'm assuming that since there's no one's chiming in with other questions, everyone fully understands all of this completely. Is that correct? Everyone's got it. Who's going to write the next legislation? Any other?
Do you mind if I add one thing to this discussion? Well, again, keep in mind that the two programs, the EIDL and the PPP, are two separate programs, right? So if you use some of the EIDL funds for the PPP, the government's going to ding you for that, and you may not get any of that loan forgiven, depending on what that loan amount was. And another thing, the government doesn't want you to double dip. And so if you have $4,000 in advance, or if you have $10,000 in advance, whatever that amount is, if you've already received your EIDL advance before you get your PPP funding, you have to disclose that to the lender, and that will impact the amount that's forgiven. Or on the flip side, if you get your PPP funds before your EIDL funds, then whatever your PPP amount is, that forgiveness amount will be reduced by whatever your advance is. So again, that could be reduced by $4,000 or $10,000, again, depending on what that advance is. And so you can't double dip that forgiveness function. It's only available either completely on the EIDL or a little bit taken also off of the PPP.
In previous CivicLex workshops, we have this game that we call the acronym challenge, where you have to match up letter acronyms with what the program description is. And I feel like a lot of us would do very well with these programs at this point: PPP, EIDL, SBA. There's so many different acronyms to understand. I see someone unmuted themselves. Is there another question to weigh in?
Yeah, this is Megan. I have a question. Is there a longer term plan? Because I've been reading about just different plans that'll, to reopen the economy, and a lot of them are still relying on some degree of social distancing. So that'll still have an impact on businesses, and many businesses just simply won't be able to function at capacity. So is there any kind of long-term help available for businesses? How sustainable are these two programs? We're seeing obviously a limit right now. Do you think the government will kind of re-up them as needed, or will they just run out eventually? And what kind of job, I guess, just what's the effect of that? Do you see? I don't know.
It almost sounds like there's two questions there, right? What's
Sure.
being done for the loans, and then what's the long-term implications? Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Well, in terms of what's being done for the loans, hopefully we'll find out at the end of the day today. I know our government's meeting to see what can be done, so that's to be determined. As far as long-term implications, certainly I think that the restaurant industry is going to show the most impact long-term. right now, businesses, restaurant businesses specifically, try to get as many people in the restaurant as possible, right? I mean, they try to really maximize the number of tables they can set, the number of seats they can have, really to get up just as high as they can to what the fire department says is the building's occupancy limit. Now, due to social distancing, that's no longer going to be the case. And that will certainly impact the way that restaurants calculate their margin. Right now, they're basing it on literally a full house. If social distancing happens to go for an extended period of time, if a restaurant used to sit 50 people but can only sit 30 people now, that's going to have a huge effect on that business's margins.
Yeah, I've talked to some restaurant owners, and that is a big problem because you've got a lot of the overhead involved because the kitchen has to be fully staffed to produce the food and bartenders and front of the house overhead, and you only have a fraction of what you normally have to cover all that overhead. So that's certainly a problem, and I've talked to some people that are trying to figure that out, but that's a tough figure.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like that, with all of this, it's going to have to be almost day by day, right? It's hard to know what the future is going to hold. And I think, we all are in that position of not knowing what's coming, right? There's none of us have an understanding of what's to come. Is there anyone else that has, it's 3:58 and I want to make sure we're being cognizant of everyone's time. Is there anyone else that has a question that you want to drop in the chat or ask via video or phone? No, nothing. Fausto, Dan, do you all have any last thoughts or anything that you want to weigh in on before we say goodbye to everyone?
Just want to thank you, Richard, for having me on the town hall meeting. I enjoyed it. I hope some of it was helpful. I'm always available if anybody has any questions or wants to talk offline. We'll be here. So thank you again, and stay in good health.
Thank you. We really are appreciative for you jumping on. Michael Geip says thank you all for the good information. Fausto, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
Richard, again, I just want to thank you and Civic Lex for putting together this series of digital town halls. I think it's been quite helpful, and I love the breadth and depth that you guys get into. If you want to learn more about my services, or if you'd like to discuss specifically what this means for you and your business, please go visit performancedrivenky.com to learn more about me and the special service I have put together for the pandemic. Again, that's performancedrivenky.com. Richard, many thanks again to you and your team.
Thanks, Fausto. And one last thing for anyone else that's on here. We have 2 more town halls scheduled next week, and they basically are going out for months. But we're going to have one town hall on Tuesday next week, focusing on basic needs as they relate to families and shelter. We're going to be joined by some really wonderful guests from the Nest Center for Women, Children, and Families, as well as the Hope Center and Lexington Rescue Mission. We're really excited for that. And then we're also going to be having a conversation on Thursday about the impact that this is going to have on individual artists. In the weeks after that, we're going to be talking about everything from mental health and recovery to the city budget to the impact that this is going to have on our primary elections. So please stay tuned to civiclex.org for any information about that, and jump on our mailing list. And we send these out almost more than once a week. So sorry if you get too tired of our emails. And I do want to make sure that you all remember that this is recorded. We'll have it up on our Facebook page within the next day or so, as well as our YouTube account. And then we also have a podcast feed that we're distributing this through called Civic Lex Radio Hour. If you have any questions for me ever, feel free to shoot me an email. My name is Richard Young. My email is richard@civiclex.org. And I want to say thanks again to everyone for joining, and especially thanks to Fausto and Dan for being our featured guest today. This was really informative, and I hope we all learned a lot. So thank you all.
Thank you all.
Have a good one. Stay safe, everyone. Wash your hands.
Bye.